Picture this. A Formula One driver enters the first corner on a damp track, foot buried on the brake pedal, and nothing happens. Not a complete failure, but a horrifying moment of uncertainty that feels like betrayal from the very technology that keeps them alive. Carbon brake discs are engineering miracles in the heat. But add water and their friction plummets so dramatically that teams must make impossible choices days before a single lap is even driven. So why does moisture turn a weapon into a liability? And how do engineers fight back? This isn't just about comfort. It's about winning championships and staying alive. A tenth of a second lost on braking at Monaco or Singapore can mean the difference between a podium and a wall, between a driver trusting their machine and second-guessing themselves at 300 kilometers per hour. Teams that predict the weather correctly and choose the right brake compound before practice even begins have already stolen a race advantage that their rivals won't recover. But here's what makes this genuinely brutal. Once you've committed to a compound, you're locked in, because changing brake pads mid-weekend means rebuilding your entire thermal strategy from scratch. So understanding exactly what happens when water meets carbon isn't just physics. It's the difference between leaving the circuit on the podium or in the paddock, wondering what went wrong. Picture a carbon brake disc at operating temperature. We're talking 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to glow red if you could see through the wheel rim. At that temperature, the friction material is almost perfectly dry, almost crystalline, and the brake bite is absolute. You stamp the pedal and the car stops with devastating authority. The carbon fibers are locked together by a resin matrix, and as the disc spins at thousands of revolutions per minute, the micro surface stays uniform, predictable, repeatable, trustworthy. Then rain falls during the night, soaking the paddock, the track, and critically, the brake assembly that's sitting exposed in the garage or covered only by a thin blanket. Water molecules, impossibly small, impossibly persistent, seep into the porosity of that carbon matrix, filling the microscopic gaps between the fibers like a sponge absorbing rain. When the driver gets back in the car on Friday morning, those discs are still cool, maybe 50 degrees Celsius, and saturated with moisture. The first time they brake hard, friction generates heat, and here's where the physics turns against them. Water boils at 100 degrees, creating a vapor barrier between the friction pad and the disc surface. That steam layer is slippery. It's like pressing your foot on ice instead of asphalt. And suddenly, the friction coefficient drops by 30, sometimes 40%. The driver goes in expecting the bite they felt in free practice, and instead gets a spongy, vague pedal feel that demands they brake earlier into the corner, hold the brake longer, and stay off the throttle until the temperatures climb. But the brutal mathematics: by the time the disc finally dries out and reaches optimal temperature, you're already halfway through the corner and committed to a line that was built on uncertainty. Engineers call this the moisture lag, and it's invisible until you're experiencing it at 200 kilometers per hour, feeling the difference between a carbon disc in the dry and a waterlogged one in every single braking event of the race. The 2016 European Grand Prix at Baku became the perfect laboratory for this exact nightmare. Lewis Hamilton started on pole, but more importantly, he'd spent all of Friday and Saturday learning how his Mercedes carbon discs responded in the cool, damp morning sessions, data that felt irrelevant by Sunday. Race morning came cold and wet, and Hamilton's engineers faced an impossible choice. Select a friction compound optimized for the dry conditions the forecast promised, or hedge toward intermediate wetness they might never actually see. They chose dry-spec compounds, banking on the sun and track temperature rising as predicted. For the first 20 laps, while those discs were still absorbing moisture from the air, Hamilton's braking point into turn 1 was where it always was. But the feedback through the pedal wasn't there. He had to trust mathematics instead of feel, braking earlier than the data suggested, losing tenths in a race where Nico Rosberg was managing exactly the same problem, but with better initial luck. Then there's the 2021 Abu Dhabi title decider between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. A race decided in the final lap under the safety car, yes, but the entire prior sequence hinged on brake management in mixed conditions. Both drivers had spent the weekend preparing for the warm, dry circuit Yas Marina usually delivers. But Friday's cooler sessions meant their brake packages were slightly over-optimized for heat, vulnerable to any moisture creep. Hamilton led for most of the race, but every safety car restart forced both drivers to manage the moisture uncertainty all over again. Unpredictable friction, unpredictable stopping distances, and in that chaos, the final restart became less about driver skill and more about which brake package was least punished by conditions nobody fully controlled. Now imagine this. You're a team principal the night before a race, staring at a 30% chance of overnight rain in the forecast. Your engineers have prepared dry-spec compounds based on track temperatures they expect by Sunday afternoon. But if that rain comes and lingers, those same discs become almost ornamental. Do you gamble and stick with your plan, knowing the driver might need 5 meters extra braking distance when it matters most? Or do you hedge toward a wetter compound now, accepting that you'll lose pace in the dry conditions that probably will materialize? That's the real race, not on track, but in the motorhome the night before, betting your season on moisture you can't see yet. So here's what we've learned. Carbon-carbon discs are only invincible when they're hot and dry. The moment moisture enters the equation, friction collapses, drivers lose confidence, and a 1/10 of a second advantage evaporates into guesswork. And that guesswork, that decision made in a motorhome while rain might or might not fall, that's where championships are actually won and lost. What aspect of motorsport science should we tackle next? Tire degradation under extreme fuel loads, or how teams predict downforce in untested wind conditions? Let us know in the comments, and please subscribe so you never miss the real stories hidden inside.